Hope you're all having a great day. We're going to get back into our very basic Bible study, looking at the book of Judges. Remember last time we looked at chapter 17 and studied about Micah. And today we're going to get into chapter 18. Now, just as a way of reminder, these last chapters in the book of Judges are not in sequential order. They kind of flash back during the whole period of the Judges to give us a glimpse of what life was really like during this period, what the mindset of the people were. And generally speaking, the mindset of the people was that they were apostate. They had fallen away from worshiping the true and living God, the God of their fathers. They had fallen into idolatry. Remember, they had, as they moved in to take over the promised land, these different tribes stopped short and did not drive everyone out, and they began to intermarry. They began to worship the gods and idols of the people that were in the land that they had failed to drive out. Remember, God had given the inhabitants of the land many years to repent, turn away from their idols, but they just got worse and worse. And then finally, God gave the children of Israel the nod to go in and occupy the land. He drove many of the inhabitants out before them. But again, the children of Israel fell short, and instead of driving the people out and keeping separate, they intermarried, started worshiping their idols and all of that. So let's look at chapter 18 and see what we have here. Now, this chapter is chronologically before some of the judges we've already studied about, like Samson, for example. This is before his time. So let's jump in and see what we have. Chapter 18, verse 1. In those days there was no king of Israel, and in those days the tribe of the Danites were seeking an inheritance for themselves to live in. For until that day an inheritance had not been allotted to them as a possession among the tribes of Israel. Now let's stop just a second and talk about that phrase that we've seen repeatedly, and that is, there was no king of Israel. Now, without a king, that meant the civil administration was lacking. There was little recourse or ways to settle disputes. But it goes beyond that. On another level, because they weren't worshiping the true and living God, there was no spiritual king either. You know, for us as Christians, we look at Jesus Christ as the coming King of Kings and Lord of Lords, but they had turned their back on God as their king, and they had no civil king. So it created a predicament for them. So the sons of Dan sent from their family 5 men out of their whole number, valiant men from Zorah and Eshtaol, to spy out the land and to search it. And they said to them, "Go search the land." And they came to the hill country of Ephraim, to the house of Micah, and lodged there. So remember, Micah had turned to idolatry. He had made some graven image and an idol, and he had actually hired a priest, self-designated his own priest. And so this is where they wind up lodging. When they were near the house of Micah, they recognized the voice of the young man, the Levite, and they turned aside there and said to him, "Who brought you here? And what are you doing at this place? And what do you have here?" Clearly they recognized probably his accent or something. They knew he wasn't from this particular area, and it was a familiar accent to them, so it aroused their curiosity. And he said to them, "Thus and so has Micah done to me, and he has hired me, and I have become his priest." That verse, "thus and so," is kind of yada yada. He gave them the rundown on how he got there. And they said to him, "Inquire of God, please, that we may know whether our way on which we are going will be prosperous." Well, they really didn't explain what their intent was and what they were doing. At least we don't see it here. But they're going to get an answer. And the priest said to them, "Go in peace. Your way in which you are going has the Lord's approval." This is just a vague statement, probably just to get them off his back. Then the 5 men departed and came to Laish, and they saw the people who were in it living in security, after the manner of the Sidonians, quiet and secure. For there was no ruler humiliating them for anything in the land, and they were far from the Sidonians, and had no dealings with anyone. So they're pretty secluded, they're set apart, peaceful, and as we're going to see, they're going to become victims. When they came back to their brothers at Zorah and Eshtaol, their brothers said to them, "What do you report?" And they said, "Arise, and let's go up against them, for we have seen the land, and behold, it is very good. And will you sit still? Do not delay to go, to enter, to possess the land." Let's go right now. Let's rush in there and take it over. It's just what we've been looking for. Verse 10, "When you enter, you shall come to a secure people with a spacious land, for God has given into your hand, a place where there is no lack of anything that is on the earth." This place has everything, and God's going to give it into our hands. Then from the family of the Danites, from Zorah and from Eshtaol, 600 men armed with weapons of war set out, and they went up and camped at Kiriath Jearim in Judah. Therefore they called that place Mahanadan to this day. Behold, is west of Kiriath Jearim. And they passed from there to the hill country of Ephraim, and came to the house of Micah. So now this whole army is passing through there, taking the same route that the scouts did. They come to the house of Micah. Then the 5 men who went to spy out the country of Laish answered and said to their kinsmen, "Do you know that there are in these houses an ephod and household idols and a graven image and a molten image? Now therefore consider what you should do." It's not saying this in a condemning way, saying, "Hey, there's some neat stuff in here." And they turned aside there and came to the house of the young man, the Levite, to the house of Micah, and asked him of his welfare. And the 600 men armed with their weapons of war, who were of the sons of Dan, stood by the entrance of the gate. This has to be pretty intimidating. So this isn't as benign an encounter as it at first seems. Now the 5 men who went to spy out the land went up and entered there, and took the graven image and the ephod and the household idols and the molten image, while the priest stood by the entrance of the gate with the 600 men armed with weapons of war. It's kind of like out of the movies. You got this one guy standing there with all these soldiers around armed to the hilt, while another small group goes in and cleans out the house. And when these went into Micah's house and took the graven image and the ephod and the household idols and the molten image, the priest said to them, "What are you doing?" I think it's pretty evident. And they said to him, "Be silent, put your hand over your mouth and come with us, and be to us a father and a priest. Is it better for you to be a priest to the house of one man, or to be priest to a tribe and a family in Israel?" Going to see in the next verse, he's happy with that. I mean, he had to be pretty intimidated and scared. And now instead of being beaten or killed, he's being offered a position that's probably going to benefit him much more financially and in his stature. And so in the next verse he says, "And the priest's heart was glad, and he took the ephod and the household idols and the graven image and went among the people." The implication is he kind of went out in the middle, which is kind of a copy of how the Israelites were told to move. You know, the Ark of the Covenant was in the middle, and then the various tribes were stationed all around. So he was kind of in the middle there. Then they turned and departed and put the little ones and the livestock and the valuables in front of them. I think they anticipated that Micah's probably going to be upset and come after him, so they're putting all their possessions and their families up front. And then they're staying behind so that if Micah's army or Micah's men do come up, they'll encounter the armed men first. When they had gone some distance from the house of Micah, the men who were in the houses near Micah's house assembled and overtook the sons of Dan. The fact that it was men from houses near Micah's house indicates that they had benefited from this religious activity of Micah. He had let them participate in this idol worship and had probably assumed some kind of a position as a spiritual leader of the group, even though it was idolatrous. And they cried out to the sons of Dan, who turned around and said to Micah, "What's the matter with you, that you have assembled together?" Pretty obvious. And he said, "You have taken away my gods, which I made, and the priest, and have gone away. And what do I have besides? How can you say to me, what's the matter with you?" This shows the emptiness of all this, because to Micah, everything he had, his security, his religious security, was all tied up in these idols. He's saying, what do I have left? I've got nothing. Well, actually, he had nothing when he had them. Very empty. And the sons of Dan said to him, "Do not let your voice be heard among us, lest fierce men fall upon you and you lose your life with the lives of your household." Pretty bold threat there. So the sons of Dan went on their way, and when Micah saw that they were too strong for him, he turned and went back to his house. So he's left, as he said previously, with nothing. This may have been God's way of giving Micah an opportunity to reevaluate his situation and his beliefs. Then they took what Micah had made and the priest who had belonged to him and came to Laish, to a people quiet and secure, and struck them with the edge of the sword, and they burned the city with fire. This is pretty repulsive to us, so we just can't imagine. We don't know the true hearts of the people that were there. God had said he was going to give the children of Israel this land. But as we see in other places of the Bible, even though God gives something, orders something to be done, gives instructions on how things are to be done, and sanctions certain actions, he is quite often displeased with how people carry out his instructions. And I think this is one of those cases. So even though they're taking the land which God had promised when Joshua was still around, the way they're going about this, God would not be happy with, I don't believe. And there was no one to deliver them, because it was far from Sidon, and they had no dealings with anyone, and it was in the valley which is near Beth-rehob. And they rebuilt the city and lived in it. So it sounds like they utterly cleaned them out. And they called the name of the city Dan, after the name of Dan their father, who was born in Israel. However, the name of the city formerly was Laish. And the sons of Dan set up for themselves the graven image, and Jonathan the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, he and his sons were priests to the tribes of the Danites until the day of the captivity of the land. Now Manasseh is actually a different word for Moses. Some commentators feel that a scribe changed a letter so that it reads Manasseh, in some kind of feeble attempt to save the embarrassment of Moses' son being a priest in this idolatrous situation. Don't know for sure. But at any rate, they set up this idolatrous worship center. And the last verse, so they set up for themselves Micah's graven image, which he had made all the time that the house of God was at Shiloh. An emphasis on an image which he had made. Micah had conjured up his own religion, so to speak. But this is, like we said at the beginning, an indication of the mindset at that time. The children of Israel had just fallen so far away from God that they had fallen into idolatry. It's just hard for us to imagine them getting to this point after seeing all the miracles that God had provided. But remember when we were talking about back in Joshua As the children moved into the land and they got war weary, they were tired of fighting, they did not persevere, they did not drive the people out. And so you have this constant tension. They become complacent, and just their spirituality just goes down, 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 down. And this is just another example of it. We're going to stop here today. Now in chapter 19, it's going to get even worse. It's so bad I don't even want to do it, actually. But for now, we're going to stop. I hope you'll watch the next one. In the meantime, God bless. Bye-bye.